All right, ladies and gentlemen, this, as you know, has been a camp of many firsts. There's no doubt about it. This is the first year that we've had in our camp, that we've held it in a hotel. This is the first year that we've offered football play-by-play, and this is the first year that we've had a commencement speaker. It's my privilege to introduce our commencement speaker. He's a former sportscaster and President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Roy Engelbrecht, and thank all of you again. I'm very pleased to be here with you today and tomorrow. A line from George Burns, at my age, I'm pleased to be anywhere. But I understand that this room is filled with aspiring sportscasters. Well, Brent and Bob, look out. Seriously, I am truly impressed with the camp, its objectives, and of course, you, the campers. You've come here from many walks of life. Some of you are doctors. I understand that there are also lawyers and students and teachers. For some of you, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You've come to give it your very best, the best shot, and then go back to the grind. As for others, you're here because you aspire to a career in sportscasting, and this is the first step toward that goal. But what brings all of you here to Los Angeles this week and to this camp, and what brings me here today, is one thing: the love of sports. And when the exciting world of sports are within it, the sportscaster plays an important part. Now, there's no denying the importance of the athletes. They have rare God-given talent. But it takes the voice of an experienced sportscaster to bring it all to life. And it's a camp like this that brings your dreams to life and makes them a reality. Everywhere, everyone here has worked long and hard this week. You've practiced your play-by-plays, your interview techniques, and you've probably gotten a little constructive criticism from time to time also. And not willing to, well, I think I just started to skip a page here, and I better not do that. But instead of sitting at home in your lazy boy chair, eating Cheetos and saying, hey, I could do better than so-and-so, you've come here to set out to prove it. That's pretty impressive, especially to a guy who had the same dream many years ago. I'm not saying I have any regrets, but I often wonder how far I could have gone if I'd taken my sportscasting more seriously. But instead I left to take a job in the movies. Now, in Hollywood, if you didn't sing or dance, you became an after-dinner speaker. And pretty soon I did more speaking than acting out there in the mashed potato circuit, and found myself running for governor and not exactly knowing how come. And not willing to leave bad enough alone, I ran for president. I ended up having to leave my beloved California for 8 years living in public housing in Washington. And now, here I am at the prime of my life and out of work. Certainly you should be proud of yourselves for taking the first step, which reminds me of a story. At my age, everything reminds me of a story of how a young fellow from the Midwest made up his mind to follow his dreams. I left my home in Dixon, Illinois to start my career in radio. I had, well, to put it mildly, I had a difficult time finding work. During the Depression, it was the depth of the Great Depression. I graduated from college in 1932, and that was really the bottom. And I'd made up my mind I wanted to take a crack at sports announcing, so I started out on the trail. And a businessman had told me, knowing what I was going to do, he gave me some instructions. He said, don't go to the radio stations and ask for a job as a sports announcer. Radio's new. Just tell them you want a job in radio and you'll do anything that's available, and then take your chances on working in the inside to become their sports announcer. Well, I got some experience. They also told me in Chicago is where I started. That was the headquarters of radio in those days. Not New York, Chicago. Because radio, new and all, in New York, half the broadcast was going out over the ocean. In Chicago, it was going out in all four directions to wherever the people lived. But I won a lady in Chicago at one of the major stations told me that she thought I had a right to try to get into radio and all, but she said, we here can't afford to take anyone without experience. So she said, why don't you go out in what we call the sticks to all those radio stations outside the city there and try. And that's where I went. And eventually, having gone in and out of any number of stations, I went to WOC station in the banks of the Mississippi in Davenport, Iowa. Now, in those days, the initials of radio stations, call signs, usually meant something, and WOC meant World of Chiropractic. Peter MacArthur there was the program director. He had come to this country as a vaudeville performer from Europe, and he used to, first he started as an announcer before he became the program director, and I can remember living back there and hearing him close out by saying, WOC Davenport, where the West begins, in the state where the tall corn grows. Anyway, by the time I got to the station, he was program director, as I say, and had already held auditions, because when I started to put up my pitch, he said, where were you yesterday? Well, I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, we had 90 people in here yesterday auditioning, and we hired an announcer. And I, just before that, I'd kind of, at my hometown, before getting up nerve to go out and try radio again, a new Montgomery Ward store had opened, and they were looking for a manager of their sporting goods department. So having played 4 years of high school football in that town and running a championship track team and so forth, I went in. I didn't get the job. My father knew how disappointed I was, and he told me to take the family jalopy and drive down to WOC, and that's how I got there. And now, hearing him for the first time, I said aloud, but to myself as I went out the door, how the hell do you get to be a sports announcer if you can't get a job in a radio station? And fortunately, the elevator wasn't at that floor when I got there, because I heard the clumping, the two canes. He had an extreme case of arthritis, and he was thumping his way down the hall after me and saying, hold up, you big... And I stepped back and waited for him, and he said, what was that you said about sports? Well, I said, that's what I want to be, is a sports announcer. Well, he said, do you know anything about football? I said, I played it for 8 years. Well, he said, if I was sitting at home listening to you and you were broadcasting, could you make me see a football game just from your, and I said, I think I could. And he took me in a studio, he stood me in front of a microphone, pointed to a red light up there on the wall. He said, when that light goes on, you start broadcasting an imaginary game. He said, I'll be in another room listening. So I stood there and I thought, when that light goes on, I thought, what am I going to do for names of players and so forth, an imaginary game? Well, then I thought, wait a minute, why imaginary? In the preceding, or the fall just passed, my senior year in football, with 20 seconds to play in a game against Western State University, we went 65 yards in a single play for a touchdown and won the game in the last 20 seconds. When I knew all our guys' names, and I knew enough of the Western States players' names that I wouldn't have to fish around. So I decided it wouldn't be imaginary. I was going to do the last several minutes of that game. When the light went on, I said, here we are in the fourth quarter of the game, a chill wind blowing in through the end of the stadium. We didn't have a stadium, we had bleachers. And then I said, the long blue shadows are settling over the field. That became a kind of a trademark with me after I got to be a sports announcer, when it got to be fourth quarter. So I started in and I called some plays, and finally I brought us to the 35-yard, our own 35-yard line. And then this was the play where we won the game in reality. And thanks to a fellow named Knut Rockne, right guard, or guards, I was a right guard on the team, didn't have to always stay in the line and hit the guy opposite him. On certain plays, you backed out of the line and went around leading the interference. And this is what I did on this play that we called. And I went off tackle, and my job was to take the first man in the secondary. And I missed him. In the game, I missed him. And I've never known to this day how Bud Cole got by and reversed over to the sideline and down 65 yards for a touchdown in those last 20 seconds, and we won the game. But in the broadcast, I will have you know that I delivered a block. Well, that was my tryout, and as I say, Pete MacArthur came back into the room where I was standing. I'd finally just grabbed the microphone stand and said, that's all. And he came in and said, be here Saturday, you're broadcasting the Iowa-Minnesota homecoming game. And there it was. I drove the family jalopy home. He'd promised me bus fare when I came back on Saturday. And when the game was over, I was hired as a sports announcer for WOC. Then I found out that WOC had a sister station in Des Moines, both on the same wavelength. And they were owned by the same company. And they split the week in the showing. Half of it came from WOC and half came from WHO because they were on the same wavelength. You couldn't have them both broadcasting at the same time. And then I discovered, I spent 4 happy years at that station in Des Moines, because shortly after I got the job at WOC, I didn't know this was happening. WHO had a request in for a clear channel station, 50,000 watts, only 15 of them in the nation. And they got it. And all of us at WOC were moved over to WHO, and there we were now on one of the top 15 stations in the country. And I spent 4 years there, and they were happy ones. At 22 years old, I'd achieved my dream. I was a sports announcer. And if I'd stopped there, I believe I would have been happy there for the rest of my life. I had accomplished my goal and enjoyed every minute of it. During my years in Des Moines, I attended an endless number of football games, Big Ten games, broadcasting. racing and track events, the great Drake relays that were held every year, things of that kind. And through the magic of radio, I covered hundreds of baseball games in the major leagues played by the Chicago Cubs and the White Sox. At that time, they played in Chicago when one team was home, the other team was on the road. So we broadcast the Cubs when they were in Chicago, and when they left for out on the road, it was so expensive to follow them, and we switched over to the White Sox and broadcast their home games. And it wasn't without some risks there that I will have to say. I was not at the ballpark for either broadcast. It's too expensive for the radio to cover it that way. So I did it by telegraphic report. I had a fellow on the other side of the window here, Curly, with the headphones on. He was listening to a dot and dash Morse code from the ballpark, and then he would hit the typewriter, oops, hand me a slip of paper, and I wouldn't do that. And, well, anyway, on it would be the play. For example, he would hand me a slip that would say out, 4-3. Well, 4 was second base and 3 was first base. That had to mean that was a grounder. So I would sit there with that in front of me, but then I would sit on the radio, I would say, here comes the pitch and so forth, and it's a hard hit ground ball down over second base, second baseman going over after the ball, picks it up, whips it over to first in time for the out. You know, just say, you know, if you just said out 4-2, you wouldn't sell any Wheaties. But I was doing this one of those games, and all of a sudden I saw Curly start typing. It was a game between the Cubs and St. Louis, the Cardinals. Dizzy Dean was pitching, and so I had him get his sign from the catcher and so forth, and waiting for that slip of paper to come to me. And all of a sudden, Curly was shaking his head no, and I thought, gee, it must be some magnificent play. And he handed it to me. I had already had Dizzy throw the ball, so I had a ball on the way to the plate, and the note from Curly said, the wire has gone dead. Well, as I say, I had the ball on the way to the plate, so I had Jurgis foul it off. And then I looked, and Curly just did this. I knew there were half a dozen other stations broadcasting the game from the ballpark, and if I said there was some mechanical delay there on ours, they'd just switch stations, and we wouldn't have an audience anymore. So I thought, well, I'll have Jurgis foul another one. And then he fouled one that just missed being a home run by a foot. And then he fouled one over back a third, and I described the fight between the two kids over the ball. And I kept on going till pretty soon I'm beginning to sweat, because I think, wait a minute, I may be setting a world record here for somebody hitting consecutive foul balls. And I kept on, and finally Curly sat up and started typing. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And when he handed me the slip of paper, I could hardly broadcast for laughing. I was giggling. It said, Jurgis popped out on the first ball pitched. Well, I had him pop out, and the game went on and so forth. And you know, just a couple of years ago, on Ripley's Believe It or Not, on the air, I heard him actually talk about Jurgis setting a world record in hitting foul balls. So somebody hadn't caught on to the truth. But I know I've said this many times before, but I've always been struck by something about sports that I'd like to share with you. And that is when men and women competitors put on their uniforms, walk out onto the field, the floor, or the track, labels disappear. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or a Jew, It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter which side of the tracks you come from. It just matters that you're out there doing your best. And that same equality is not restricted to the playing field. No, in the stands too, the only thing that matters to the team is the team that you're rooting for. And you know, the boss can be sitting there beside the janitor that sweeps out at night, and they're both of them rooting for the team, cheering together for the home team, high-fiving each other when they score, and booing loudly at a bad call. For those few precious moments, it doesn't matter who wears pinstripes and who wears overalls, which makes me wonder why it should matter at all. Well, I've gone on longer than I'd intended. You should be proud of yourselves and proud of what you've accomplished this week, and eager for the challenges that lie ahead. This may be the last stop in sportscasting for some of you. Maybe it wasn't as easy as you'd thought, but there's always a chance that there's a Marv Albert in the audience, a Red Barber, a Vince Scully, a Mel Allen, or a Harry Carey out there. So on this, your graduation day, go out there and bring sports to life for your audience. You are the talent of tomorrow. I want to just give you kind of a personal thing here, or a clue about something, though, when you get those jobs and when you're doing that broadcasting. And that is, my fan mail over the years as a sports announcer, almost inevitably, every letter would say, among other things, that I sounded as if I was speaking especially to them, the person who wrote the letter. And I kept getting these, and I kept wondering, well, what am I doing that makes them think that I'm just speaking to them? You know, the first days with a microphone are horrifying, because there's mic fright really does exist. And you look at it and you think there's tens and tens or hundreds of thousands of people out there that are going to hear what I say. And I finally realized they were a little group of fellas, the kind that you get acquainted with and work around and play around with, and I learned that they would drop into the same barber shop we all used when I was broadcasting a ball game, and they'd sit there and hear the ball game. So when I wanted to ad-lib something, or maybe try for a crack of some kind or other, knowing this, I really, without saying this or saying them, mentioning them, I was broadcasting to them. Well, of course, everyone else that heard it had to think I was broadcasting directly to them, because that tone of speaking to someone. So I'm only telling you that when it's time and you're ready to go, don't think in terms of 100,000 people out there listening. When you're talking, just think to yourself about somebody that you know is listening, whether it's a family member or who, and just sort of, without saying the exact words, broadcast with that person in mind that you're talking to. And everybody out there listening will think they're the person that you're talking to. I just couldn't close out without giving a little hint of that kind. But again, you are the talent of tomorrow, as I've said. And as they say in radio at WHO, or as I would say at WHO Des Moines, this is Dutch Reagan signing off. Thank you, and God bless you.
This has been a great close to a great week. Mr. President, our Sportscasters Camp, well deserved. Thank you, sir, so much. Thank you very much. Very proud to have you. Thank you.
Thank you all, and good luck to all of you.